Alright, this is Yalak again with another lesson in the New Testament is Fake series, and today I want to title this lesson Any Man. And I'm taking that just from one of the verses I'll be reading here at the start. And this lesson is actually showing one of the lies of the New Testament, and this is just another lie that you find in the New Testament. If we look at this little story here in St. John chapter 8, and I'll read verse 32 and 33, this is where this Jesus character is telling them that they can be free if they'll only just accept the truth. Yet we find that they were lying, which I'm going to show in this lesson. So it's not surprising then that he was telling them that they need to accept truth, because obviously they are such liars, right? Which is fitting for the New Testament, I think, right? So St. John chapter 8, verse 32 and 33. And it starts out here in this verse 32, with Jesus speaking, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Verse 33 says, "They answered him, We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free?" Alright, and my problem here is that they said they've never been in bondage to any man. And, you know, if you run a search online, all kinds of people are going to tell you silly things. Like, you know, they're saying, okay, maybe, because people are asking about this, how could they say they've never been in bondage to anyone? Like, have they forgotten that their forefathers were slaves in Egypt and so on, right? So they're saying, oh, these people trying to defend the New Testament, which is basically Christians, mostly, you know, are saying, well, they were just, it was just a rushed statement, a rushed answer, or it was just a silly answer, or, you know, whatever. I mean, it's just really silly, right? All these little excuses are just trying to save face because of the deception in the New Testament that these New Testament believers hold to. And it's shameful to see such lies when compared to the Old Testament. So they're trying to cover it up so that they can continue to teach their New Testament, right? Teach from their New Testament. But how can they say that they've never been in bondage to any man? I mean, are these Israelites so dumb in the New Testament? You know, it looks like the Israelites in the in the Old Testament must have been smarter than them, because some of the things you find in the New Testament just seem so silly. Okay, they've never been in bondage to any man. Clearly, to me, that's a lie, right? And you're still going to get people out there who are going to say, no, that's not a lie. This is the explanation. That is the explanation. And, you know, horse dead and cow fat. But I'm going to show you here that clearly something is wrong here, right? I mean, you would have heard, most likely, like I did, growing up, that Jesus is wisdom, right? He's the master of wisdom. They're trying to rob, I mean, they look at the scriptures in like the book of Proverbs that talk about wisdom, and they say that's Jesus, right? Yet this Jesus, who is actually wisdom embodied in flesh, is standing before them, and he has walked with them for so long. About the full time of his ministry was about 3 to 3.5 years, and he's been with these disciples for so long, and he is wisdom himself. And they sometimes give these dumb answers, right? Strange. But let's look here at how their answer that they've never been in bondage to any man stacks up, you know, alongside what's actually written in the so-called Old Testament, right? In our law books and the writings of our prophets, right? Let's run over actually first to Acts chapter 1 and verse 6. they're saying, when it says, when they therefore were come together, they asked of him, saying, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? Now, obviously, this in the book of Acts here, they're kind of placing it after the Gospels, right? Which then would mean after the book of John, where they said they've never been in bondage to any man. So remember, being in bondage would include things like you're serving someone else, you're serving another king, you're serving another nation, you're serving a heathen kingdom, you're living under someone else's rule, another king's rule, and so on. You're not, free. You're being punished by the Most High, the God of Israel, and so on, right? So they're not running their own kingdom under the Most High anymore. Someone else is ruling over them, right? Someone else has dominion and so on over them. Obviously, if they're saying here, will you restore the kingdom again? That means that they're under someone else's bondage. They're in bondage under someone else's rule. Someone else is ruling over them. So they are underneath someone else, the Romans at this time. Yet, back over in John, which was a little before this, they're saying, we've never been in bondage to any man. It would be really embarrassing if some time ago their people, forefathers were in bondage under the Romans or somebody, and then that's finished and gone, and now they're free, right? But they're still actually in bondage. Romans are ruling over them, and they're saying to him in John chapter 8, verse 33, we've never been in bondage to any man. And then over just a short time after, now they're saying to their master and Lord, Jesus, are you going to restore the kingdom? Why? Because they know they don't have the kingdom. You see the lie right there? They know someone else is ruling over them. They know they're in bondage to the Romans, yet they're saying here, we've never been in bondage to any man. Sometimes you have to just shake off this New Testament Christian religion lie of the New Testament and just become straightforward with the New Testament. You're protecting your knowledge of everything that they've taught you in the church, and your experience with speaking in tongues and different things that you've seen in the church, and how nice the church services are and whatever, and the preaching that you say is good preaching even though it's filled with lies and so on, and the Bible studies and the prayer meetings and the choir songs and the after service coffee and so on that you have, and the fellowship. You're confusing all of that stuff with truth. Just because you feel good because you can go and have coffee and so on after the Sunday morning service or whatever, doesn't mean there's truth there, right? Because you've made a lot of friends there doesn't mean it's truth. If you're looking for God, you're looking for God. If you're just looking for religion, then you're just looking for religion. It's two different things. Right? Two different things. I walked away from an opportunity for real solid ministry and to pastor a church. Right? And people put me down, laughed at me, made fun of me, mocked me and so on, right? I walked away from that. From the opportunity to be going around and getting set up and getting paid and all that kind of stuff, and going around traveling, ministering and so on, right, over time. When I found out that our people were the children of Israel, I walked away from it to go towards learning and keeping the commandments, rather than staying in the Christian church, right? But when I told other people, they decided to stay, right? I reached out to other people, they decided to stay. Well, that's their choice. But you see, there's a difference between people who are looking for ministry or looking for position and looking for religion, and people who are looking for God. See, I stayed in Christianity all throughout my childhood and my early adult years, part of my adult years, because that's all I knew. I was looking for God, and they told me this is where you can find him, in the Christian church and the Christian religion, so I stayed there. But once I found the Most High through his commandments, through his instructions, I left the Christian religion. Because what I was looking for was not position, was not ministry, was not being paid to preach. What I was looking for was not position and opportunity in ministry. I was looking for God. The people who hear this true message of the commandments and the Sabbath and so on, and that they're the Israelites, even those who aren't Israelites but who hear and understand that the commandments are the correct way to go, the Sabbath and so on is the correct way to go, those people who hear and stay in the Christian religion are people who aren't looking for God. They're looking for friendship and position and ministry and so on and so forth, and fellowship with people, right? And they don't want to lose all those things, so they say, aha, well, I found the truth from what you're saying is the Sabbath and so on. It's in the Old Testament, but I don't want it because I'll lose everything else. I'll lose all my friends, I'll lose my position, I'll lose my pay, and so on, right? So there's a difference between looking for religion and looking for God. When I found God, I realized it was not religion I was after, so I left. Those who were after religion and after friends and money and ministry and so on, they continue to stay. But they're going to have to answer to the Most High eventually for themselves, right? So these guys here are actually lying about their situation in the New Testament, and it does not make sense when you read Old Testament scriptures, right? That shows that they really were in bondage. Because why in Acts chapter 1 verse 6 are they going to ask, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel at this time, when they already said in St. John 8:33, we've never been in bondage to any man? Something is wrong. So let's look at some Old Testament scriptures that show that they really were in bondage, right? At different times. And you see, even when you read history outside of the actual Bible, you can tell that around this time when they said this Jesus was there, the Son of God that came down from heaven, you can tell even from historical writings that they were in bondage under the Romans, right? So, I mean, I don't believe this Jesus, Son of God that came out of heaven and came down through Mary was actually here at that time, right? Because I don't believe he even existed. Other people named Jesus existed, yeah, around that time, but I don't believe this particular Messiah, Son of God, ever existed in flesh, period. Why? Because this Messiah that was taught to me from a child that came down from heaven, that was sitting on a throne on the right hand of his Father, and came into the womb of Mary, that particular Messiah or that particular Son of God does not exist from what I see in the Old Testament. Therefore, it is impossible for him to have come from heaven and then to have been born in the womb of Mary. That Jesus did not exist. But he exists on the pages in the stories in the New Testament because it is a carefully planned and well thought out deception. So in the Old Testament now, let's look and show that the Israelites were in bondage at different times. Alright, let's run over to... We'll go way back now to the book of Judges, chapter 3, and verse 7 and 8. And you can read the whole chapters for these different verses I'm reading as I go through to get a better understanding of, what was going on and the fullness of the stories that I'm going to be pointing out. But I'll just get right to the verses I want. Judges chapter 3, verse 7 and 8. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Most High, and forgat the Most High their power, and served Baalim and the groves. Right? So they walked away from the Most High's instructions. Therefore, the anger of the Most High was hot against Israel, and he sold them. So he sold them means that they were given over, so they're not in control of themselves anymore. Someone else is controlling them. He sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, and the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. So that means that for this time here, for 8 years they were in bondage unto this king of Mesopotamia. Clearly, they were in bondage, a time of bondage that lasted 8 years under this particular king. They were sold or given over to him. Now, like when our foreparents were sold into slavery and were on the slave ships, transatlantic slave trade, when they were on plantations and so on, they were sold, right? They were given over. I mean, we know they were sold, like, literally, physically for money, but they were also, spiritually, they were mentally or in their minds now that they should be using to serve the Most High. In their minds, they were They were in bondage. They were sold and given over. And that's why we have struggled so much with our identity, because in our minds, we've become someone else now, being the descendants of these people, right? We were given over and sold. So mentally, our minds aren't even free. So that's why when the children of Israel went into bondage to different kings, sometimes you hear that they started serving other gods even more, right? Because they were serving those gods prior to getting hit with bondage or captivity as punishment from the Most High. But then when they went into these captivities, they would just have a free-for-all and start worshipping these images even more. Sometimes the kings would force it on them even more, or they would just have like a free-for-all. Well, we're already being punished, so why bother try? Why bother try to repent? Sometimes that's how it happened, right? So it's like they were in bondage. Mentally, spiritually, they were in bondage. Also physically, they were in bondage because they were serving these other kings, like this king of Mesopotamia in this case. Yet, they said in John chapter 8 verse 33, we have never been in bondage. Why are the Israelites in the New Testament with Jesus, the master of all wisdom, because like in the book of Proverbs, he is wisdom itself. Why is it that these disciples, these Israelites, walking with the wisdom giver, so dumb in the New Testament to be saying we've never been under bondage? They don't know no scriptures? You're telling me this Son of God, a well thought out plan from the Father, sent down his Son, his Son, the fullness of all wisdom, and all he can find is just a bunch of idiot Israelites who don't have their heads screwed on, that they don't even know the scriptures, they don't know the history of their own people? How are they going to rise up and free themselves? What if he sets them free? They don't have no wisdom in their minds to carry on the freedom. They would only be taken down again, because they're idiots, they're fools, to not even know the history of their own nation, that they've been in bondage before, like even in this scripture here, Judges chapter 3 verse 7 and 8. All right, now in the same chapter, we'll go down some more. Now read the rest of it, like I said, but eventually they got delivered, right, from this king of Mesopotamia. Then in the same chapter, going down to verse 12 to 14, in the same chapter, they get back in bondage again. But they said, we've never been in bondage to any man, right? Now here is another man that they've been in bondage to, right? Another king, another heathen king. Verse 12. And the children of Israel did evil again. Why again? Because they got freed, delivered, they stopped, whatever, and now they jump back right into the same old garbage again of transgressing the Most High's instructions, commandments. And they did evil again in the sight of the Most High. And the Most High strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Most High. And he gathered unto the children of Ammon, right? So he gave them into the hand of another king again, right? Of Ammon and Amalek, and went and smote Israel, and possessed the city of palm trees, which they say is Jericho. And possessed, right? Okay, now look. Possess here, Yarash, from the Hebrew, means to seize, to dispossess, to take possession of, inherit, disinherit, occupy, impoverish. So that means that Israel was impoverished at this point, right? Yet the New Testament Israelites are looking in the face of Jesus and saying, we have never been in bondage to any man, right? Come to poverty and so on, right? Dispossessed. So let's just try to insert some of these words in what they were saying here in John chapter 8 verse 33. We've never been in bondage to any man. It's like saying we've never been seized by any man, but the scriptures here are telling you that they were seized, because Yarash means to seize. We've never been dispossessed. We've never been taken possession of. We've never been, right? We've never been occupied. But yet it's telling you that these armies from these different kings are coming and coming and coming, and every time they would transgress and are possessing the Israelites, their land, occupying their land and taking them over and impoverishing them, right? But these Israelites from the New Testament, don't seem to know anything about these Old Testament stories, don't seem to know anything about the history of their people, of their nation. They don't seem to know anything about the God of the Old Testament sometimes, but they seem to know a whole lot about this Jesus, his son. These looks like some dumb Israelites in the New Testament. At least the Old Testament Israelites knew that they were doing something wrong. They had their heads screwed on. They just knew, okay, we're transgressing and we know, but we don't care. Like one time they looked at the prophet and said, you can say what you want. We're going to keep worshiping the Queen Mother of heaven. So you see, they actually knew that they were doing something wrong, but they were just carried away in their own mind towards those things. So they did it. And obviously got punishment later on for it, right? But in the New Testament, the Israelites sometimes just seem like they're idiots. Like this whole thing of this St. Paul who didn't walk with Jesus, didn't spend all this 3.5 years with him like the other disciples did, but these so-called powerful and smart disciples that walked with Jesus, turned apostles, they seem to have all this expert one-on-one training from Jesus, who even sent them out in groups, 2 by 2s and so on at a certain time. They get all the fine-tuned training, and they saw him pray. They learned how to pray. They learned how to do miracles, being taught by the Master himself. They should be like the CEOs and so on, right, of this whole gospel. But they let this other guy come in, St. Paul, and run the show and wrote so many books of the New Testament more than them, and called the shots on almost everything. Even calling the shots really on how one should interpret the Old Testament law versus New Testament grace. You see, these are dumb Israelites from the New Testament. Right? So that's another, Judges chapter 3 shows more than just one time when they were taken over. But they said, we've never been in bondage to anyone, in that lying verse in St. John chapter 8 verse 33. Alright? Let's run over to the next chapter, Judges chapter 4. 1 to 3. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Most High, when Ehud was dead, and the Most High sold them. Again, sold there is trying to tell you that they weren't in control of themselves anymore. Someone else now controls them. They were given over or sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto the Most High. Why are they crying if they don't have any problems? They don't have no problem. Why? Because they've never been in bondage to anyone. Why are you crying to the Most High? You're not in bondage. Right? But yet here it's saying they cried unto the Most High, for he had 900 chariots. So they're terrified now, they're scared, right? 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. Right? So that king of Mesopotamia, he was ruling over them for 8 years. This one here giving them 20 years, like they're doing hard time, right? Under his hand, his heavy hand, because he oppressed them. So again, let us try to slip in some words from the meanings of these Hebrew words in the Old Testament into the New Testament mouth of the New Testament Israelites in St. John chapter 8 verse 33. We have never been in bondage to any man. Lakatz here, from oppressed, right, means to squeeze, press, oppress, right? So in St. John 8:33, they're basically saying we have never been squeezed by any man. We've never been pressed by any man or oppressed. Now, you don't think that even when they were slaves in Egypt that they were oppressed by the Pharaoh? It's kind of like saying, it's kind of like the New Testament Israelites there in St. John 8:33 are saying, we've never even been under the Pharaoh. We've never been oppressed by them. Yes, still the Most High had to say to Moses, in Exodus chapter 3, that he heard the cry of his children, the children of Israel, and he's come down to free them, right? Why didn't Moses say to him, what? They don't have no problems. Who are you trying to free? There's nobody to free you. Your children are fine. And why didn't, if there was no problem, if they weren't being oppressed and going through hardship in the land of Egypt, why did Moses kill a man and take off when he realized somebody saw him kill the man? Why did he run? Kill the man and run. Till he was even scared to go back to Egypt. So when the Most High said to him, I want you to go back, the Most High had to even try to console his heart, to help lower the fear in his heart, concern in his heart, and let him know, it's okay, just relax. The people who you feared, they're dead and gone. Right? But he killed the man to defend his people. Yet New Testament Israelites are saying we've never been in bondage to any man. We've never even had a Moses that had to kill somebody to try to stand up for his Hebrew brother. Come on, man. Start thinking of your New Testament in a different way. Start looking for truth, searching for truth. If you're sitting in the Christian churches, start searching for truth. If you're in an Israelite camp, start searching for truth as well when they're teaching you that this New Testament Jesus is the truth. He's got nothing to do with truth. The book written about him is a book of lies. And here is just another lie, right? From St. John chapter 8, verse 33. Alright. So, okay, let's run over now to Book of Lamentations. Chapter 5 and verse 8. Obviously they're having a hard time, right? And it's being expressed in these words here. That says, servants have ruled over us. Come on, how is that possible? They said we have never been in bondage to any man. To any man. Servants who should be serving them, the Israelites, are now ruling over them and making them, the Israelites, servants to the servants, or servants to those who should be servants to them. So things have been flipped upside down. Servants are now ruling over them, right? Now if you look at this word here that says ruled, where it says servants have ruled over us, it's mashal, and it says to rule, to have dominion, to reign. So again, St. John 8:33, to put the words in the mouth of the New Testament Israelites to show what they really were saying is, we have never been ruled over by anyone. No one has ever had dominion over us or reigned over us, right? No one has ever exercised dominion over us. That's what they're saying in St. John 8:33. I mean, aren't you sick of these lies in the New Testament? So many people have been showing the different lies in the New Testament. You got to stop looking at your speaking in tongues, you're shaking and knocking over chairs, and start looking at what is said in the real scriptures and line it up with what is said in the second book, the New Testament. Because the Most High said, let me find that, I believe that's Deuteronomy 4:2. He says to not add anything to it, right? Lamentations 5, let me run over just to make sure that's correct, so that you can look it up if you don't know it. Deuteronomy 4 verse 2, ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Most High your power which I command you. You understand that the reason why people who believe in the New Testament are reading the New Testament and believing in Jesus is because someone came along and added unto the word which the Most High gave, added unto the commandments, right? Added onto what's there in our law books and the writings of our prophets, and they added on, okay, so now we call it the Old Testament, but they added a New Testament which should not have been done. Ye shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may what? Keep the commandments. That's why people with the New Testament usually don't keep the commandments in the Christian religion. And even the people in the Israelite communities who now know we're Israel, who believe in the Jesus from the New Testament, they are going to say, yeah, of course, well, we believe in the New Testament, but we keep the laws. Hush up. This here says, do not add unto it, Why? So that you may keep the commandments. Obviously, you are breaking a commandment like Exodus chapter 23, verse 3, or Deuteronomy 5:7. You're breaking a commandment that says you shall have no other God, no other power before me. Jesus is worshipped as a God by you and by all the people in the world who worship him. People even in other religions who don't even have anything to do with Christianity, but who are in another kind of religion, know that Jesus is a God that is worshipped. Yet you say, oh, but Jesus isn't God, he's just a son of God. How can you be the son of God and not be God? You're sitting on a throne on the right hand. You're not sitting on a fold-up chair. You're sitting on a throne, which means you have rulership and dominion. You then are God. And you're sharing rulership with your Father. So you are God. And you're running the show with your Father. And eventually he claims all the power by saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Now, if all power is given, that means that he don't even regard a second throne anymore, sitting beside his Father. He's saying, all of it has been given to me. All power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Does not leave room for some power to be with the Father, because all have been given to me. Therefore, he is saying he is God. But you told me in the Christian communities and the Hebrew communities that he is not actually God. He is God. Because he said all power. You said, oh, he didn't claim to be God. Of course he did. He said all power. All of it has been given to me. Not some of it. Not the son's share. Not the son's amount of it. Not like the prodigal son who got his share. No, I'm not getting a son's share or an only son's share, a begotten son's share. I'm getting the Father's share, the Creator's share, because the Creator has all power, right? But now I'm getting all of the power. Don't let them sit you in your Hebrew camp and with their expert knowledge of 20 years of running this camp tell you anything else. Use your own common sense. Use your mind. All means all. All power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. If he had said even in earth, okay, that would still be a problem, but at least you would say, okay, maybe the Father has the power in heaven. But he says all of it has been given to me in heaven and in earth. Let me move on, because if you don't see that, it's not because you don't see it, it's because you are in denial. You cannot break from the teachings of your Hebrew camp, and you cannot break from the teachings of your Christian pastor, because your heart is locked into deception and you refuse to break it. Let's run back to Lamentations chapter 5. So verse 8 says, servants have ruled over us. There is none that doth deliver us out of their hand. But John 8:33 says nobody's ever ruled over us. And these guys here are saying in the Old Testament, there's none that can deliver us out of their hand. Why are they crying out for somebody to deliver them and saying, oh man, we're in a bad spot here, bad shape we're in because nobody can deliver us out of their hand? How can somebody be crying like that, saying nobody can deliver us? Why? Because the Most High is not delivering them, because it's time for punishment, right? Why are they crying about people not being able to deliver them if they're free and all right? If things are hunky-dory, right? It's because things were not all right. They were in bondage under the servants of theirs who had now become their rulers. Because they were in bondage unto their own service. The Most High flipped things on them because of their transgressions. Verse 9, we got our bread with the peril of our lives. Just to eat was difficult, a risk. Because things just weren't right. They weren't ruling over themselves anymore, right? With the peril of our lives because of the sword of the wilderness. All right, skip and go down to verse 13. Okay, well, look at this. Verse 12. Princes are hanged up by their hand. Now, okay, you know that don't sound too nice, right? The faces of elders were not honored. Wow, things just don't sound too nice. Verse 13, they took the young men to grind, and the children fell under the wood. They're working like slaves, but they've never been in bondage to any man. These New Testament Israelites, with Jesus, the master of all wisdom, the embodiment of wisdom, are talking, he is talking to a bunch of fools. Yet they're asking Acts chapter 1 verse 6 to get the kingdom to be turned back onto them. How can a bunch of idiots run the kingdom that's supposed to rule the whole world? They don't got no sense. Right? They ain't got no sense. But they want kingdom to be handed unto them. And look at this. At least we here in 2016 are trying to learn all that we can about our forefathers' history from the scriptures and from reading other books that we find in libraries or read buy online and so on. We're trying to learn the history of our people from way back then. But these New Testament Israelites don't seem to care or have a clue or any knowledge of the history of their forefathers, that their forefathers went through bondage and captivity and so on, right? They don't seem to want to know, yet they want to run the kingdom. At least we're trying to position ourselves to have the knowledge of our forefathers' history so that when the kingdom comes back to us, we'll be ready because we know exactly what to do. We know how to fall in line. We know what's expected. We know what the commandments are. We know how to live and to operate the kingdom. We know how to operate the kingdom, and we know what not to do anymore to make the mistakes that they did in the past, right? Because why? Because we aren't idiots. The Most High is waking us up, and we're gravitating to it because we're hungry. We've gotten there. We've watched our forefathers and us now, although we're sensing it in different ways, feeling it in different ways. We've seen all the tragedies and the bad stuff, the punishment and the captivity and the plantation fields and the illnesses and whatever that have happened to us, and the scattering all over the earth that have happened to us. And we're sick of it. We don't want any more. We want out of this now. So we're trying to position ourselves to not have to go through this ever again, like the scripture says. We seem, even though we're so much more removed from these ancient times, we seem more sensible than these New Testament Israelites who supposedly walked with the very Son of God and looked him in his eyes, and they don't have any clue. Damn idiots. Anyway, so, alright, look at the same Lamentations chapter 5. Let's run to verse 16. The crown is fallen from our head. See that? Because somebody else is ruling over them. They're not ruling over themselves. They're not ruling over their own kingdom properly. They're like, sometimes they go into a captivity and they would be allowed to carry on their laws and so on, right? So, but I mean, it's not like it was when they were really free and serving the Most High properly, right? Running the show themselves, right? Woe unto us that we have sinned, right? And verse 22. But thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wroth against us, right? Very wroth against us. So that's why someone else is ruling over them, because the Most High rejected us. He was angry at us. This is what they're saying here. All right, let's go now to 2 Kings chapter 17, right? And we know this is very, very famous scripture here with the captivities, Assyrian and Babylonian. But I mean, it really shows up some more the lies of the New Testament. And in particular with John 8 chapter 33 that says they've never been in bondage to any man. I mean, how did they end up in that spot where they said Jesus needed to come, right? 2 Kings, if somebody else didn't rule over them and root them out of their position of power, right? 2 Kings chapter 17. And this is going to be the last chapter I read from here. 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 6. Again, read this whole chapter. Very, very important chapter in terms of understanding, some of the important things in the Old Testament, that the way it ended up, actually, at this point in Kings with their transgressions, that led to this very bad captivity with the Assyrians, and we know Judah went with the Babylonians after, maybe about 100 years or so after the Assyrians took Samaria. 2 Kings 17 verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria. Come on. But we've never been in bondage to any man. Isn't that bondage? If someone's coming and rooting you up out of your land, removing you away from your customs, your rituals, your way of life, everything, and taking up even out of the very land. It's not like they're just ruling over you in your own land. They're rooting you up and moving you away, right? But they said we've never been in bondage to any man. But it says here that he took Samaria and carried Israel away. Away. Right? Away, gala, it means to remove, depart, go into exile. So, to fit in the correct words again into the mouth of the Jesus New Testament Israelites, in John 8:33, they're basically saying, we have never departed from our land while being in bondage to someone else or being carried away. We've never gone into exile because we've never been in bondage to any man. But obviously, Old Testament writing is saying something different. That he carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. Not in the cities of the Israelites, not in the cities of Israel, but someplace else. Why? Because they were now in bondage to somebody else, to the king of Assyria. Lying New Testament Israelites who said they were disciples and who said they became apostles and were spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. No, they were spreading the gospel of the God of Israel. Come on. It's not the gospel of the God of Israel they were spreading. It's the gospel of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus himself is a deceiver. Right? They were spreading the gospel of the commandments. No, the gospel of grace, which is a different kind of grace apparently than the grace found in the Old Testament. This grace in the New Testament seems to just allow all kinds of deception to be taught. Anyway, let's continue. Still with, that was verse 6. Okay, let's run down to verse 18 to 20. Verse 18. Therefore, the Most High was very angry with Israel and removed, right? Removed means he took them out of his sight, removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. Remove them from his sight, right? And the Most High is always watching over his land. Yet, if he's removing them out of his sight, it means he's kicking them out. So they're going someplace else. But these guys said they've never been in bondage to any man. He's removing them from the land so that someone else will rule over them as punishment, right? It's captivity they're going into. But John 8:33, we've never been in bondage to any man. That would make the Most High be lying here. And the people writing this, right? Because the Most High said, I'm just going to kick you out. That means he's lying because we've never been in bondage to any man. But the scripture says, the Lord is not a man that he should lie. Alright, so that's verse 18. Verse 19. Also Judah kept not the commandments of the Most High their power, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made. And the Most High rejected all the seed of Israel, all of them. So if they've never been in bondage to any man, how come he's rejecting all the seed of Israel? And afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of spoilers, but we've never been in bondage to any man. John 8:33. I'm going to keep repeating that, John 8:33, so you know exactly where to find it and find the lie. And he afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of spoilers until he had cast them out of his sight. Whenever you remember John 8:33 to go ask your pastor about this New Testament lie, just try your best to remember 2 Kings 17 verse 20, because those two should really go together. John 8:33, 2 Kings 17 verse 20. Right? Where it says he afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of spoilers and cast them out of his sight. Which means that he is saying in that verse 20 that they're now in bondage to someone else. They're under someone else's power, another king's power. He afflicted them. How was that affliction done? By letting someone else rule over them with hardship, taking them as slaves, but we've never been in bondage to any man. He made them be in bondage to someone else. Verse 23. Until the Most High removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets, so was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day, but we have never been in bondage to any man. Verse 24 and 26. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. So someone else is now taking over their land, yet still they've never been in bondage to any man. If they weren't in bondage and if they were still in the land, why didn't they just fight back and conquer and take over? Obviously they were in bondage under someone else who was taking over their land. Verse 26, wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations which thou hast removed, that means that they were now in bondage under this king, but of Assyria, and were removed already from their land, right? And placed in the cities of Samaria, know not the manner, wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations which thou hast removed and placed in the cities of Samaria know not the manner of the God of the land. Therefore he hath sent lions among them, and behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the God of the land. Right? And look at verse 27 now. Kind of interesting. Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, carry thither one of the priests whom ye brought from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let them teach them the manner of the God of the land. But John 8:33 says we've never been in bondage to any man. You see the lie that's showing up here with John 8:33 from the New Testament? Because in 2 Kings 17 verse 27, this heathen king is having power over the priest. So he can take the priest and move him and ship him off to another land, and then just call for the priest to come back. So he's ruling over the priest. Even the priest has to now listen to him. How can a heathen king be commanding a priest of the Most High? How can a heathen king have power over a priest of Israel? Even a high priest of Israel? A priest of the line of Aaron? A heathen king has control over the priest to be ordering him and bossing him around? And you're telling me they weren't under bondage? Being under bondage means you listen to the one who has you under bondage, has you in bondage, right? So obviously they're in bondage here, right? And the priest has to listen and just do whatever he's saying, right? So he sent for the priest and said, hey, teach them the ways of your God, right? But they said, we have never been in bondage to any man. So you read it again, or actually let me read it for you and close this off right here. Remember 2 Kings chapter 17. Just go and read all of it yourself, and keep that in mind when you're reading John 8:33 next time, right? If you're sitting in the Christian church. So here again now. They answered and said, we be Abraham's seed, from John 8:33, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Now you've heard these things, you answer that question. See you next time.